Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you very much for joining us tonight for this May 4th Nursing Symposium on AI. What a great opportunity it is for us to be able to share this information with all of you folks tonight. So for those that are online, a little bit on the logistics side here. If Q&A session will be open, so if you have any questions, please put your comments or questions into that Q&A line. If you happen to lose the connection, just log back in again and you'll be able to follow through with us. We've got a great lineup tonight, and I'd like to say thank you to the nursing committee for doing a great job, headed up by Olga, Marianne, Valerie, etc. It'd probably take me a half hour to go through all the names, but great job in putting it all together. Thank you. All right, so what we're going to do here, as you can see, I'm the president of the chapter, and what I'm going to do is to turn it over to Olga, who is the committee chair for our nursing event tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. I won't be long. Actually, I'm here for a very brief period of time just to thank every one of you for coming and showing up. That's important because as nurses, we all show up. Otherwise, none of us are being taken care of, right? So I actually wanted to quickly introduce Joe, who is going to do a quick presentation of Microsoft Teams, and then I'll turn it over to my co-chair, Valerie. Thank you.
Thanks for being here and very happy to host you guys tonight.
Hi, my name is Valerie Serwicki, and I'm one of the co-chairs of this conference. And I just wanted to welcome everyone here. This is our second annual nursing symposium, but our first in person, which we're very excited about. And it's being produced by Microsoft, obviously, and American Nursing Informatics Association, the New York Tri-State chapter, and SONCL, which is the Society of Nurse Scientists, Innovators, Entrepreneurs, and Leaders, and HIMSS, Health Information Management System Society, the New York State chapter. And this event would not be possible without the generosity of our sponsors. And then lastly, we would like to extend a very special thanks to our Symposium Planning Committee. Thank you, everyone. This includes all of our friends who are not listed on our slide. And now I'd like to invite Marianne Connor up. She is the New York State chapter of HIMSS co-chair, and she's going to tell you more about our program. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening and welcome. And it's great to see such a great turnout and online as well. So tonight, a little bit about the program. Our attendees will be able to claim 2 nursing continuing professional development hours after the event. So please look out for an email with the instructions from IntelliCare. Okay, about the symposium tonight. Tonight, we will focus on the role of nurses in demystifying and embracing artificial intelligence. Nurses play a pivotal role in identifying innovative, applicable, and equitable technology in healthcare. We will learn how informatics nurses forge an innovative future through AI. So we'll discuss strategies for communicating AI model predictions based on predetermined goals of communication. And we'll also learn how to identify ethical principles and values relevant to AI to patient decision-making. And now I'd like to introduce and invite Kathleen McGrow for our first session. And I'm going to read her amazing bio. So Dr. McGrow is the Chief Nursing Information Officer at Microsoft. As part of the Microsoft Health and Life Science, she advises organizations on how innovative technologies can enhance clinical, operational, and financial performance and maximize capacity and patient experience and transform care models. She is expert in how specific technologies can best be deployed to address digital transformation imperatives, including workforce crisis through provider enablement, consumer engagement, analytics for population health, and cognitive computing to support a learning health system.
I'm really excited about our guest speaker. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here with us tonight. So I'm going to do this introduction. I will, in the interest of full disclosure, let you know that Tom and I go way back. So it is my pleasure to introduce Tom Lawry as the strategic advisor to health leaders worldwide and is the best-selling author of Hacking Healthcare: How AI and the Intelligence Revolution Will Reboot an Ailing System. In a Harris poll of more than 3,000 attendees of the 2023 JP Morgan Health Conference, Tom was named as one of the most recognized leaders driving change and engagement in healthcare today. Tom is the managing director of Second Century Technology and a partner in Aspire Health Innovations. He is a former Microsoft executive where he served as national director of AI for Health and Life Sciences, director of Worldwide Health, and director of organizational performance for the company's first health incubator. Prior to Microsoft, Tom was a senior director at GE Healthcare, the founder of 2 venture-backed healthcare software companies, and a health system executive. Tom is well published and sought after keynote speaker in the United States, Western Europe, and the Middle East. His work and views have been featured in Forbes, CNET, New England Journal of Medicine, Inside Precision Medicine, and numerous podcasts in health, medical, and business media. So it's my honor to welcome Tom. Very excited.
Thanks for the
that Tom is
introduction.
able to be here.
Sorry, go ahead. I think there's a lag.
Pretty big bio there, Tom, huh? Anything
Well,
you
I was
want
going
to
to say, yeah, you missed my paper route when I was 14.
add? I'm sure it was a good one because I know where you're from. It's pretty rural, so you would have had to put a lot of miles in. So that's pretty good. So I wanted to say first, congratulations on the book. Actually, 2 books you've written around AI. Pretty timely, huh? What do you think? I mean, boy, that was like a perfect storm for you, huh?
Well, they do say timing is everything, but you know, as you said, we go way back. I won't tell you stories about Kathleen, but I could. But no, we go back a ways, and I've had the good fortune and privilege of always being in and around healthcare since I was in my early 20s, starting out as a hospital executive. But I've always been focused and fascinated by data relative to you know, what we do. So back in the old days, we were talking about Excel spreadsheets, and then we graduated, and we keep graduating, and all of a sudden AI came into you know, focus, and here we are, and it's going faster and faster. So yeah, it's been a great ride, and most everything I've learned though is really by having the opportunity and privilege of parachuting into big healthcare organizations who are, you know, filled with people like those of you who are on the front lines trying to solve problems, and just being an advisor to looking at how to take these big problems and use data, and now data and AI, to help, you know, bring it in behind those of you who are clinicians to make things better. So yeah, it's been a good ride.
And I would be remiss, and you would be remiss if we didn't say Happy Nurses Month to all the nurses.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Happy Nurses Week, Happy Nurses Month. Honestly, it feels like that's not enough, given knowing what you do, knowing the challenges that exist today. I don't know how else we bump that out, but yeah, for everything that's been happening, you know, anytime you want to find someone doing real work on innovation, chances are within that team are nurses driving that. So thank you for everything you do.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks. So in your book, Hacking Healthcare, I actually do have the book here with me, but I didn't bring it now. Sorry, I didn't bring it up just because I got my papers here, and I want to make sure I keep pointing on these questions because we could go like way crazy. You refer to glacial to warp speed. Are you confident that we can sustain warp speed and truly capitalize on some of the learnings, or do you think we're going to rest on our laurels? And this might be a little bit a beginning of the generative AI discussion, but what are you thinking?
Well, I think the simple answer is it's probably a little of both. So, you know, just to riff on what you just said. So a while back, that really became the first chapter of the book, Forbes came to me and said, write something for us about what healthcare learned from fighting a global pandemic. So the article basically pointed out 3 things. One, we showed that an organization and an industry that's normally used to moving at glacial speed can in fact move at warp speed and move quickly. 2, we found that many, not all, but many leaders are willing to challenge the status quo and willing to move things in a way that really do replicate or represent agile transformation. 3, and the premise of the article that eventually became the premise of the book is, humans fought and won the battle when it came to the pandemic, but the single weapon they chose to go faster and be better was AI and analytics. And so the premise of the article goes on to show examples, but then the closing comment, which is the theme of the book, is simply to say, let's take everything we learned from fighting a global pandemic and apply it to solving all those other big problems we're faced with every day. So coming back to your question, we were going fast. I think we kind of slowed down some, particularly on things like telemedicine, telehealth. And now we're seeing some other things where the question is probably less whether healthcare leaders and organizations are maintaining that pace, but rather when I look at what's happening in the world of AI today, the velocity of change is increasing at a very dramatic rate. And so if we couldn't keep up with it before, what's it going to be like? Because the market's not going to stop progressing. And the real challenge will be for health and medical organizations and leaders is what are they going to do to keep up?
Yeah, that's a good point. And further down, I have some stuff I'd like to get into with around large language models, but I'm going to keep going the way we had originally planned to kind of like move forward. And then Mary Ann's going to keep us honest here with timing, and we'll have some Q&A at the end, so in case anybody has any questions. So I'm a firm believer, like you are, that AI is really going to be what changes. I believe in automation and AI. We are not going to get more workforce. We're not going to get more nurses. We're already down 600,000 nurses from the pandemic. They say we're going to be down another 800,000 by 2027, I think. So out of 4.2 million nurses, we're going to lose over 1 million, and we're not going to produce enough nurses. So we know that our healthcare systems, they're still pretty disconnected. They have a lot of inefficiencies. And even though AI will arguably play a role here, do you think the bigger issue is culture change? And how can we help with that culture change?
Well, I think it's many things, including culture change. Again, backing up, I'm really not trying to promote the book, but as you're talking, I've got a whole chapter that relates to that I call the coming care calamity. And basically the premise of that story, which is to me kind of a very scary nonfiction approach, where when I look at, so going into the pandemic, we had so many challenges that you just outlined as far as workforce burnout, shortage of nurses that was only getting worse. Then the pandemic hit, and we all know what happened there. But you look at that and the trajectory that we're on, and then I look at other data such as every 15 seconds, a boomer is turning 65, which means they have access to Medicare, other things. The data shows on average, those over 65 use 4 to 5 times as many health resources as those under 65. So let's take those dynamics alone, ratchet those out by 5 to 10 years. And if nothing changes, to me, that's a very scary scenario, both for consumers and frankly, for anyone in the nursing industry. So to me, that does set up the dialogue around what are we going to do? How are we going to do things differently? And to me, that comes back to the premise, the value proposition of AI done right, which is what do we do to bring the best of what we're doing in AI and bring it in behind nurses, organizations, hopefully run by nurses, to make things more efficient and more effective. So I just close that by saying, if there's anything you remember, AI has a little to do with technology, but it's really not about technology, it's about empowerment.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just for folks in the room, if you need to do the math, by 2030, all the boomers will be 65 and older, and that's only 7 years away. So that's concerning. So all the boomers will be seniors in 2030. And, we know seniors have much more issues around chronic health, comorbidities, et cetera. So we really are going to need to have those types of clinicians out there taking care of them. So if I had to ask you, what are the top 3 things to know about AI? What would you tell me?
Well, I got to parse that one, Kathleen. So, again, I have the privilege to be an advisor with some pretty big organizations. I was just in Chicago. I spent the day with some very senior physician leaders. They're trying to wrap their heads around a lot of things happening in AI today. And And invariably, it's amazing how many times I can be working with super brilliant, accomplished people who are physicians, nurses, others. And when I start talking about AI, particularly if they're not technical people like CTOs, they're the chief, executive officer, the chief operating officer, the chief something. It's amazing how many times there's almost this inferiority thing. I don't know anything about AI, and they push away. And oftentimes when I ask a leader the question of what are you doing to support AI in your organization, the answers are things like, well, we've hired a really good CTO. I've made sure the budget committee is allocating funds for, some of the machine learning projects. And that does not hit at, the fundamentals, what I call the leadership imperative. But oftentimes there's this thing of they push away because it relates to AI. And so to your point, the things I always coach is for everyone, including everyone in the room today, is, first of all, don't worry about how AI works, understand what it can do and then how to apply it. And, that my example there is I would be willing to bet that everyone in this room that you all are in, your smartphone is either in your pocket or in your purse. Is there anyone in the room that does not have their smartphone on them? And the thing I always like to turn to is, so your favorite application. So when you're ordering Uber, you're doing DoorDash, do you stop and worry about what's going on in the background? And yet, when we think about what's happening with AI, I see so many really smart people that push away. And it's like, don't worry about how it works. Understand the components. We can predict things. We can simulate, things like ambient listening, language translation. It's like, take the problems you are the best at understanding. If you understand the components, the building blocks, you are the smartest people to look at how to use those things to drive change. Second, I'll go fast because I'm talking too long. Corollary to that is understand what AI is really good at and what it's not good at. And here's the single greatest thing when it comes to, I go into big organizations that are investing money in AI. And when I ask the question of, how are you going to drive value at scale that you can measure? It's amazing how many times big organizations and leaders do not have a crisp answer, in part because they don't really know how AI drives value. So AI drives value in one of two ways. It either automates the way work is done or it augments. Automate means those jobs or work activities that are highly repetitive, low variance, not a lot of problem solving. Those are the things that can and should get automated out of existence. There are some positions that are mainly that they will likely go away. The majority of people in a hospital or healthcare system, though, are knowledge workers, you, doctors, others, the rev cycle specialists. This is where augmentation comes in to say, how do we bring it in behind you? So understanding what it does well, like variance analysis, pattern recognition, image analysis, but then recognize and understand what humans are good at and will likely be better at for a long time to come. Things like reasoning, judgment, common sense, problem solving. It's when you take the best of what AI does and brings it in behind you. So, think about the normal care process or the process of making a diagnosis or treatment option. It involves both. So our ability to say, I know what AI is good at, I know what I'm good at as a human. How do I bring the AI in behind me to be better at something you care about? And then the third, which I will always bring up, and it's part of your learning principles, is we've got a huge opportunity here to not only be better at all things on quality, we have the ability to do a lot to solve some of the biases and inequities that are facing American healthcare. And so I always push on the fact that AI is going to be a force of good for all people or for some people. And everyone in the room needs to be part of understanding that and making the decision on which way we go. And I often see people saying, well, we're going to leave that to the policymakers. We're going to leave that to the data scientists. It's like, no. Everyone, particularly if you're on the front line of delivering care, has a responsibility to start challenging things. So instead of being a force that's taking the biases in the real world and transferring them through machine learning and algorithms, we have the ability to not only stop that, but actually make it more equitable. So anyway, those are the three things. Long answer, sorry.
No, I'm fine with the long answer. We're here to listen to you. Don't make your head all big when you hear that, but here we are. And there's a lot of head nodding in the room.
Well, and again, the
And-
challenge, and I apologize for not being with you. We all know that when you're watching a talking head, I have no way of reading the audience, but yeah,
They're pretty
please.
engaged.
All right.
ones
Well,
that are in the
again,
room.
and Kathleen knows how to keep me in line, but if she's not, please, last thing I want to do is hold people hostage for the next hour.
No, they cut us, Tom. We got to shorten our talk. So Mary Ann's going to be on us when it's time. But you kind of softballed it to me and you didn't even intend to do it, but thanks for setting me up. So in your book, you coined this phrase called health tequity. Health tequity. I don't know if anyone's heard that before. I think you made it up, but you actually put it in a book, so that means it must mean something. So can you kind of talk about, because you just talked about, right, bias, et cetera. How do you think how vital do you think it is to engage with the broader group of stakeholders to educate on the legal, the ethical ramification of all the technologies that we have that are out there and the applications that are really performing on the different contexts? So just kind of expand upon that.
Yeah, and again, I'm parsing so I don't go on a stream of consciousness. So I just mentioned things like the challenge in the biases in the real world crossing over in digital through things like algorithms. So let's start there, and then I'll throw out a couple of other things. So in my experience, I've had the opportunity to go into big healthcare organizations who are doing great things with AI, and you'll go in and here'll be a team of clinicians and data scientists who are so excited about what they've created. They've created an algorithm, they're piloting it, and it's actually demonstrating measurable value in improving quality in general or improving efficiencies, which is great. Back to the whichever, the quadruple, soon to be even more HIMSS. Thank you. I can never keep track of where we stand with that, but the idea is they're doing something that's generally good. But if I ask them a simple question of, have you stress test that for bias? And I get that certain look, it's like, oh, you didn't. And so the point is on this, particularly in America today, there are things we can do that are producing measurable good for the general population. They can be totally legal. They can be totally compliant with any regulations, HIPAA here, GDPR in Europe, and yet still be highly unethical. And in this case, it's things like, so we've developed an algorithm that is basically risk rating the inpatients that are going through our system for their propensity to have an unexpected adverse reaction. And we've got an algorithm that gives the intensivist a couple hours notice to go out and kind of problem solve. And we found that it's actually reducing adverse events, keeping people out of ICU. So that's good. But if it's an average of 30% reduction, that's a statistic. If we break that down and I say, well, you're doing overall good, but the overall good is happening at a rate 3 times higher and better for white males than Hispanic females, and is still producing good and is still legal, is that okay? And there's a lot of that's coming forward. And again, the simple reality is any of you in the room working with anything that relates to machine learning and algorithm, the simple question for anyone is, have you stress tested that for bias? Which clinically speaking, we're talking about have we checked for statistical variance among the populations that will be using this? And then a further point, and then I'll stop, maybe, is another thing that I'm high on is that, it's already happening, but I believe 36, 48 months from now, the majority of machine learning and algorithms will not be delivered by the data science teams you have, but rather they'll be stitched into, the major systems and your major vendors, your EMRs, your imaging, your pathology systems. And it's interesting to me, anytime I'm advising big provider organizations, of asking the question of, if you're going out for an RFI and RFP for any system, and they are embedding algorithms, are you asking the simple question as part of your RFI or RFP of, if you're doing anything that's algorithmic driven, what have you done to stress test for statistical variation? And I've got I teach classes in this, but there's, as a matter of fact, it was an organization I won't mention, but it made the cover of the Wall Street Journal 2 years ago because the New York Attorney General's office took them on, accusing them of racial bias because of how they were using an algorithm. And I'm sure the data science team wasn't purposeful in saying, hey, let's be racially biased, but those things happen. So beyond algorithms, then we can drop back, look at things like connectivity. And, there's a great debate in America about needing to improve connectivity in rural areas and other places, which we do. But there's some great data from McKinsey that shows the majority of African Americans who lack connectivity, i.e., they can't have access to things like telemedicine. They live in high bandwidth areas. They simply can't afford it. So we think about that. It's like, well, it's one thing to say, let's have high speed connections across America, which we should. But the fact that just, many people are not accessing because they can't afford it, I think that's an easy problem to solve. So we start looking at all these things to talk about digital transformation. And it comes back to, if we don't address those things, it's going to be great for those who are of a certain income, of a certain race, of a certain threshold to say, man, we're really getting the benefit of that. And these are all things that I think are, if not easily solvable, they're solvable, but it starts with not only saying, yeah, I'm all for, equity, but really having those conversations and calling out those things that we need to fix.
Yeah, I think at HIMSS 23, they're calling them drivers of health now. I think they've moved away from that social determinants of health. That was kind of what I saw. And I mean, I'm from Baltimore. I'm not from the New York City area. Sorry, even though I am a member of New York HIMSS, just wanted to call that out. And I'm assuming you have similar that we have in Baltimore. So we have an urban area where people cannot afford connectivity, and the kids go and sit outside Taco Bell to do school if they actually have to do something on computer. So
Yep.
100%, it's not just rural, it's also urban.
Well, it's also things like, just to finish that, if we came across someone who didn't know how to read, would probably feel badly, but there are times where you come across people who have no computer literacy skills, and in this country, we kind of make fun of them. It's like, there are certain people that didn't grow up with computers, they didn't grow up as a professional, and yet their needs are equally great, if not more great. And again, things like digital literacy and connectivity, I don't believe are that hard to fix. We have to make a commitment, and we have to have programs to do so.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. Since you're kind of talking about some of the issues that are ongoing, let's talk a little bit about interoperability, because we know that's a huge problem. So we often talk about interoperability and the value of federated computing. How instrumental do you believe the cloud is going to be when we talk about artificial intelligence?
Well, I'm kind of chuckling because am I for interoperability? Yes, that's the short answer. The longer answer is, look, we've all known, the majority of systems used, particularly in the provider world, they're all kind of vertical slice technologies. They were created without initially the thought of interoperability. And so there are a lot of things like Fire that we're all working with. And I would say it's getting better. It's not good, but it's getting better. And then to your point, I think intelligent cloud is the way you can start making further progress, particularly when it comes to getting the data out of the silos, some of which, by the way, is a technical issue or it's a design issue. Some of it, frankly, is a business model issue when it comes to certain major systems wanting to kind of do what I call keep that data inside their garden wall. But again, we have the ability in many ways to be using the cloud when it comes to bringing many data types together, doing interesting things with it, whether it's machine learning or other things. We also have issues with, and again, I'm sure I'm stating blinding obvious for everyone in the room, but it's things like we have this growing amount of information coming off of things like, you probably can't see it, but how many of you are going to get a certain alert that says stand now? So we've got all this data, and yet, and everyone talks about it, but if you look at the ability of most systems in a hospital today to ingest assimilate and use that, it's not very good. So those are all the things, and I mean, I'm sorry, but it's almost like the same old conversation. But I think the cloud is the key. I think looking at how we bring data in and out of the cloud, and there's some companies that I don't want to promote that are working to do that. And finally, what I say is, while we're talking about interoperability, if I say that inside a provider organization, normally the answer is, yes, EMRs, the imaging. Well, it's like, well, let's broaden that. What about all of the social determinants of health? And again, in some of the programs I teach, when it comes to problem solving, one of the exercises is, imagine that the next time you're in a section meeting, you're in some nursing department meeting, or you're on a floor and people are they're having a conversation / argument about how to solve a problem. Just pull back and go somewhere in your brain to say, how would this conversation be different if there were no barriers to data? And we can sit here and say, okay, I want to see this data, I want to see this data. Here's some data from social determinants. Let's bring it together, format it this way. Which is not to say we can easily do that, but I think we have to start with that premise of, data is the key to solving a lot of problems, and then we just need to retrofit the systems we're using to make that more so.
That's a good answer. I like that. If only we could get everyone to agree, right?
Well, some of it's a mindset. There are times where, and again, this is less about AI and more about personal experience, where it's like people almost stop trying to solve the problem because they know the mountain they've got to climb on interoperability is large, or they know it's a large hill to climb, and they're short-staffed on the analysts and the data people who really should be there helping them. But I mean, to me, some of it's what I call, we've got to spend more time making fun of the way we do things because it's not working very well.
Yeah, I agree with that, because that's a nursing thing, right? Why do you do it that way? We always did it that way. And I've been a nurse for a really long time, so we did things for a really long time, but we don't know why we did it that way. So it's kind of good that you call that out. So it's interesting. So the next question I have is really around around consumerization, right? So as we strive to move from sick care to health care, and I'm going to change this a little bit. As we strive to move from sick care to health care to health, right? Because we really want to be healthy. We don't want health care. We want to be healthy. And we're kind of moving from that fee for service to value-based. We want to make sure that, we keep the patient in the center, right? So patient-centered care. How important is it that we kind of treat the patient like a consumer and simplify the process? And the example I have was around personal banking. Like back in the day, I'm so old, I got paid weekly. My nurse manager walked around with paper check and an envelope and handed it to all of us. They locked down Johns Hopkins because it was in the middle of Baltimore City. And they want the nurses to get robbed on the way out. And now, you never see a paper check, or if you see a paper check, then you do it digital. So let's talk a little bit about, how can we help simplify this process so that our patients can be consumers, or why do you think they demand that?
Kathleen, it's like there are at least 5 key questions in that one. So some of it, and again, I sure wish I could be with you all just to have this conversation rather than being the talking head. But I mean, a lot of this, let's go back to what you said, the modified fee for service versus value-based care. Here in America, value-based care is talked about often. There are very few parts of the country where there's critical mass. So I know there are organizations in Southern California that have been purposeful in their journey of saying, we really want to master this. And they're now at a point where 80% of all of their patients and revenue are value-based. But most organizations, would be fascinating to know what the average percentage of patients, care, or revenue in the greater New York City area is value-based, meaning there are incentives to do what I would call the right things, which is first manage health. So until we address the reimbursement models and the incentives, great people are trapped in a bad economic model. They're going to continue, in my humble opinion, following the money. And that's not any disrespect. It's just to say, the incentives in America do not lead us to do necessarily the right thing. So I'm actually speaking and working in Sweden in 2 weeks, and I look at models like they have, which is much more oriented to health, or I had Ron Balliser, who's the head of digital transformation for all of Clay Leet out of Israel, on a panel at HIMSS 2 weeks ago. And I asked him that question, and I wish I could play back his answer, because right before that, I had the head of data and AI, a brilliant woman, Vivian Tan from Kaiser Permanente, and she was explaining Kaiser Permanente as a payer and provider. And then Rand explained the very same thing that what Clay Leet does, and what they said as their model was almost identical. And I remember, and this was a conversation about AI at scale, not reimbursement models, but at one point I turned in front of 1,000 people and said, well, Rand, what's the difference? And he looked at me and said, we've always had our incentives geared towards our clinicians are happier and make more money when our population is healthy. And I had to go on because I would have loved to have touched that. So there's that. Then there's also the processes that we have today. And again, I mean, no disrespect for any of you who I'm probably offending right now, but the number of places where I hear people talking about, writing about, using the marketing and say, we provide patient-centered care or consumer-centered care. And in my mind, oftentimes when I hear that, it's like, no, we're not. I mean, the care process is great. There are good processes when someone has a diagnosis. But I again, another whole chapter in the book, I've written many articles, including for Forbes, around how we talk about personalized care in America, but we don't deliver it. We've got the data, we've got tools, but it's things like, at a minimum, my belief is we should be looking at how we use data and AI to personalize care, at least at the generational level. Lots of data that shows that, you know, what a boomer wants is very different than what a Gen Zer wants. And the data shows, you know, boomers love primary care and having a PCP as a gatekeeper. And in essentially, so PCP is actually a boomer's app. Meanwhile, a millennial, a Gen Zer, they want to get a medical consult from the same place they ordered dinner, which is their couch. The last thing Gen Zers want, and the data shows this, is they will not have a PCP as a gatekeeper, which is why many of them don't have a primary care physician. So what if we took all of the things we know? What if we took some of these outbound systems that big organizations are trying to do? And again, so much of that I think can be done, where we're starting to move in that direction. Personalized care means, at a minimum, I'm treating things differently at a generational level, and then more so within each generation. It's not just the clinical treatment, but it's the preference for how they want to be treated. And again, I'll get off my soapbox, but many times in America, especially when I hear people saying, we provide personalized care, in my mind, I'm thinking, no, you don't.
Yeah, no, I can attest to that. In my family, the 25-year-old still goes to the pediatrician who increased his age up to 30 because he knows kids don't leave their pediatrician. If they leave their pediatrician, they're not going to get a PCP, and that's how he's covered. So that's pretty interesting. And I'm sure there's others in here probably have similar. All right, so I got to address the elephant in the room. We're running, you know, kind of towards, we're more than halfway done here. So I got to say it, ChatGPT. So I get that over with. So we have got to discuss the emergence of large language models.
Okay.
So I'll throw that out there. So
All right. Well, thanks for
let's
putting the
talk
bait out in
about-
the water, Kathleen.
let's talk about this large language models. Maybe can you describe just a little bit about LLMs, just for those who has anyone, first off, has anyone not heard of ChatGPT in this room? Okay, no one has raised their hand.
So in other words, does anyone just step back from an alternate universe?
Okay.
Okay. All right. So let me, thanks for teeing that up. Well, to what you just said, you know, it would be interesting if we were gathered together a year ago and I said ChatGPT, how many would have known what I was talking about?
Yeah, nobody.
It's funny because, you know, today you know about it, your kids know about it because they're using it to change the way they learn to do homework. I literally, right after HIMSS, I drove to Cincinnati to visit with a friend's 100-year-old mom. I'm sitting here with Dorothy Faye Sparks, 100 years old, talking, and out of the blue, Dorothy says, help me understand this ChatGPT stuff. I kid you not. And so we all know about it. And so let me just quickly, hopefully bullet points of things. One, Anytime you hear GBT, chat GBT, the next thing you need to think is, okay, this is a flavor of large language models which are emerging. So GPT is, the market darling, but Bing has its, or Bing, Google has its own flavor. Facebook has its own flavor, Galactica, love that name. Many others are moving in that direction. It is the space race. Every big tech company, it's the space race. The hype machines are billowing smoke as we speak. There's a lot of great things that are going to come from this. And what I'd finally say is, I've been around long enough where it's always fascinating to me when something comes screaming into existence as a new technology. I mean, think about this. Large language models are emerging. I was frankly surprised that it came on the scene as fast. We've been watching it. But when something like this happens, and think about this, since it's brand new, there really are no experts. And yet it's amazing to me how many people are coming forward to claim to be experts right now. And one only needed to walk through the exhibit hall at HIMSS 2 weeks ago to see what's happening. So let me just say, everyone's early in the journey. Great things are coming. Great things are already happening. But we need to kind of, squeeze out the hype, particularly if you're in a position as an informaticist, as a caregiver, and start looking at, the evidence. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of evidence. I'll come to something else in a second, which is actually going to be available on Amazon tomorrow, which is the best evidence that will be out there for healthcare. But anyway, to finish, I didn't answer the question. So large language models are basically a type of artificial intelligence designed to generate human-like language. I was in another meeting, I had to do point counterpoint in Chicago the other day in front of a bunch of very important physicians where another consultant basically said, well, large language models are nothing but autocorrect on steroids. It's like, essentially, it's called large because it's use of what's known as neural networks, and I'm not going to geek out on you, I promise, but it's neural networks being trained on massive amounts of data, the likes of which we've never tried in the history of humankind. OpenAI, which created GPT, now GPT-4, it is not sharing the amount of data it's being trained on, but it's an extreme amount of data that's being trained on to look at patterns and all kinds of things relative to human languages anywhere on the planet. So GPT is one of the most popular, but let's just say it's one of many. So you want me to go on or you want me to stop, Kathleen? Because I've got several other bullets.
I think we got time. We're good on time.
Okay, so let me quickly run through. This is the world's fastest primer on GPT-4. And then I want to throw out at least one or two things that you may start wondering whether I'm making liberal use of the cannabis laws here in Washington State, but I'm not. So in a nutshell, GPT can do things like solve problems of logic and math, decode data sets. It can actually, I was with a company at HIMSS who is a Swedish-based company doing software in healthcare. They're actually using GPT-4 to write code. It can translate across languages. It can compose music, do all kinds of things. Now, here are the known issues. I'm sure you've all heard, because if you're watching the media, it hallucinates, which is a media way of saying it fabricates information. It produces wrong answers that look convincingly right. It starts as a blank slate with no long-term memory. So I'm seeing a lot of stuff online with people saying, well, is this going to take over for physicians and nurses and, the care of patients, and what's going to happen with patient data? And it's like, no short-term, it's a blank slate. You ask it something, when you shut it down, it goes away. And so I don't know, the analogy I used the other day is, how many you remember the movie 50 First Dates with, I think it was Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore? This is a movie.
Yep.
This is a movie about a woman who every day when she wakes up, she has no memory of the past. Well, that's GPT-4. Now that may change, but that's it. So what I mentioned earlier, there's no evidence, and I hope this doesn't come off as a plug. So There's a book coming out tomorrow in e-version on Amazon. It'll be out in paperback in June, called AI Revolution in Medicine, GPT-4 and Beyond. So this is a book. The authors are Peter Lee, who's the head of Microsoft Research and Incubation. I've worked with Peter quite a bit. He's the former head of DARPA, former head of computer science for Carnegie Mellon. Isaac Zach Cohane, who is the head of bioinformatics at Harvard Medical School. But anyway, the company that drives GPT went to them and gave them full access for 6 months prior to its release in March, just to play with an experiment. They used that 6 months to do nothing but push on it relative to medicine and medical use cases. So this is a book that has 6 months worth of serious researchers and clinicians actually looking at what it can do, what it can't do, rather than all the hype you're seeing on social media. So I simply put it out there because it's the best bit of evidence we have. But in looking at the book and summarizing, I was fortunate to get a pre-production copy a while back. So what they say, and they've got all the evidence and documentation in this book where it can do things like write clinical notes in standard formats such as SOAP. It can identify reimbursement opportunities in the form of CPT, ICD. It can generate plausible evidence-based hypotheses. It can interpret complex lab results. And here's the thing that I think is really pushing and starting to get fascinating. It can recognize the diagnosis of both common as well as rare life-threatening conditions and provide relevant references and explanations. So as Peter Lee, who he's a researcher at heart, he's the last person that I would ever imagine would hype things, but they're starting to talk about, the ability to have the potential for having AI start to mimic understanding or causal reasoning, which we don't have time now. But when you go back to what I was talking about earlier about certain things that AI is good at, certain things that humans are really good at, it may be that's going to start changing. And I say may, I'm not here to say it is, but at least this book, 6 months of people who are very highly respected and qualified, some of their work, it's a fascinating read as far as what it can do. But as Peter said, GPT is kind of like the smartest and dumbest person you've ever met, all in
Yeah, I
one.
like that. I heard that. I heard him say that. That was good.
And-
So are
and-
you
and-
a pump the brakes, or are you like, we need to be really continuing to pound on this and pound on this and pound on this so we can see what it can do? What's your
Well,
opinion?
everyone who contributed to the book basically are saying tremendous upside, but there's so many things we don't know that it's probably not prudent to just be going headstrong into it without further research and work, which is always the case with new breakthroughs. And so, you've probably seen in the media this global petition that is signed by people like Elon Musk saying, let's defer further development of large language models for 6 months, which to me is like saying, hey, I'm going to start a petition to say, let's suspend gravity because I'm getting too many wrinkles. I think we can't stop the progress, number one. I think the conversation we need to be having is everyone, those of you in the room, others on the front line of medicine, need to be leaning more into exploring what it is. I think we particularly need to, instead of slowing progress, we need to have a conversation about how do we start speeding up use of our smart policymakers, regulators, and beyond policymakers and regulators. I think we need to broaden that conversation on the guardrails by including people like you, people like the bioethicists, people like the social scientists, because there's a potential to dramatically change the way we work, the way we do good, and there's a risk of doing harm. And so right now it's like we can't bury it. What we need to start doing is pulling it forward and shining a light on it, testing it. And it's one thing, and you've probably saw the thing where, Kathleen, my alma mater, your current employer, has made a big investment in GDP and OpenAI, and they first put it in Bing. And it's one thing when a search engine starts kind of going haywire and and saying it's falling in love with the New York Times report. It's another one. Anything remotely like that would be happening if we're using it in the course of doing something that affects a consumer or a patient. And you all know that. I'm sure you would be at the front of the line on that. But we can't deny the opportunities for this to do incredible good. We've got to squeeze out the hype machines that are happening right now and really use your pragmatic nursing approach to figuring out how we're going to use this. And one other thing and here's the Twilight Zone moment. The one thing that most people don't understand about large language models and GPT is this. So everything we've done heretofore in AI has pretty much been what's known as narrow AI, where, and many of you have probably been on projects to do this, where you get a group of smart people together, clinicians and others, you define a problem you want to solve. So we want to create an algorithm that predicts this. So you have clinicians, you have data scientists, you develop, an algorithm, you test it against data, you do A/B testing, and eventually you get to the point where we're able to say this algorithm is doing what we wanted it to do, what we designed it to do. Here's the thing about GPT. The capabilities are a result of the scale of the neural network. What that means is its ability to do math, engage in conversation, translate across languages, write computer programs. These things were not programmed by humans. No one started out to say, let's have it do this. Instead, the capabilities are emerging as the neural network grows. So to put a finer point on that, when they moved from GPT version 2 to 3, almost by accident, the humans discovered that it could actually translate from one language into any other language very effectively. But no one ever set out to say, hey, let's see if we can make this translational. So when you think about that, and you think about as we speak, I'm sure we're running out of more and more and more data. No one's in charge of saying, well, here's what we wanted to try and do. It's simply a matter of it's probably going to go somewhere. It's for us to look at, well, how do we discover where it's going and then how to use it? But it's something that I'm still trying to wrap my mind around. But it's not like you got a group of people saying, here's what we're going to try and have it do.
Well,
Let
I
me
think
stop.
I think that this is like rife for the nurse informaticist, right? Like we should be on this. We should be, really helping the prompt engineers. We may be a prompt engineer, these new roles that are coming. I'm going to have Valerie come up and do one question, Tom. The only thing I want to mention as Valerie's coming up is just there was an AI meeting at the White House today. Our CEO, Satya Nadella, was there. Sam Altman, who was the CEO of OpenAI, and then two others I won't mention. I can't remember the other one's our big competitor. They were all there, and $140 million are going to be spent kind of investigating OpenAI or, ChatGPT, these GPT models, to see how they can best benefit and affect patients. So we'll see what comes of that. That was just like the first meeting was today. So Valerie's got a question for you, Tom. She's a fangirl. So
Hi, Tom. Yes. Oh, sorry, I'm loud. Yeah.
Hey, Valerie.
I'm a fangirl here. And I was so excited that you were speaking at our conference, but so sad you weren't here in person because I really wanted to meet you. But I do have a question for you regarding nurse informaticists like myself and a lot of the others here. What role do you see us playing in promoting the effective use of AI in clinical practice? And what skills do we need to develop to be successful in this role?
Wow, again, another at least 5 questions in one.
you have
No, I mean,
One
I've got to parse that. So what I'd say, if it makes sense, is everything I've been talking about since we started are the things that the nurse informatics, and I mean, any nursing leaders at some level need to be wrapping their minds around and helping to try and put their hands on the steering wheel to drive this. Because, and again, I'm sorry if I'm sounding very irreverent. I think it's great that there's a White House meeting with all of these brilliant minds. And if they create a blue ribbon panel on all this stuff with best scientists, great. Everyone in this room are the ones that every day you're going in, you're actually on the front lines of driving healthcare. So there may be people smarter than you on the intricacies of neural networks. There's no one smarter than those on the front line providing care. you're the best ones. Back to what I said about there are three things you need to understand. If you do, you can make a contribution. Understand, you don't have to understand how it works. You should understand what it can do, because then you can start applying it on things like design thinking. Beyond that, it really gets down to, as I often say, when it comes to things like machine learning and AI, the technology is almost the easy part. Not easy, but it's almost the easy part. And so I've seen organizations that they hire the right teams, they make investments, and they don't drive value at scale. And then leadership pull back and do that. Well, this doesn't work. And the reality is it does. But there's what I'm always pushing, which is the leadership imperative, which nursing informaticists should be leading and pushing on, where if leadership don't do their jobs on driving change, creating culture, doing all of those things like empowering you on things like design thinking. If you don't have things like Lean Six expertise that gets applied, those are all the things that make a difference between that investment being a capital and operating expense versus driving value. And finally, if this kind of makes sense, I was asked this the other day on a podcast, and I think I offended some people where they said, what's the number one impediment to this? You keep talking about driving value at scale with AI. What's the biggest impediment? It's a lot about the leadership imperative or the lack of leadership sometimes. But the number one thing that my answer is when I look at healthcare, even if you have leadership that say they're supportive and they're giving you budget and they're hiring, allowing staff to be hired, the number one impediment is the friction and resistance of everyone else underneath them, medical staff, working staff. Now, having said that, I probably just offended you. The point I'm trying to make is this: we have an opportunity and an obligation to make much better investments in basically creating better digital fitness with everyone in the healthcare workforce. Most importantly, starting with leadership. You cannot throw money at technology and somehow miraculously have something sprout that's really valuable. And we keep talking about this, and back to GPT, and you're already, I'm sure, seeing the headlines where IBM is talking about the number of jobs they can completely eliminate. And again, the whole thing about workforce, change is coming. And I keep really bringing it around to, if you're in a role where you're not a knowledge worker, and everyone in this room is, and it's not just clinical people, it's, it's the rev cycle specialist, it's the HR specialist. But if you're not a knowledge worker, that's a bad place to be. If you're a knowledge worker, you need to recognize your job is going to change. And like the science fiction people say, resistance is futile. So you can resist it, but better, again, figure out what you do, how this is going to change, and do the AI jujitsu. How do you create that as your superpower? And again, people high up are not going to figure that out. People high up need to empower, need to create that culture, need to open that door. And to me, that's where, if I were in the role of nursing informaticist, I would be extremely persistent to the extent you can. And I think sometimes I get parachuted into big organizations because I can make fun of things in a way that you can't, because eventually I fly back to Seattle. So anyway,
No, that's good. Hold on a second. We got one last
Okay.
question. You were running on a little bit. Hold on.
Hi, Tom. We have a question from one of our online attendees, Lisa Gayrong. What type of jobs or functions of jobs will do well with automation? Could you give some examples? And we have 1 minute to provide those examples.
Sorry. Great
There's the
question.
challenge today.
I think, well, again, what I'd say is, whatever you're doing now, look at what are all those highly repetitive activities that are chewing up your time, are not the reason that intrinsically you decided to be a nurse. And so getting good at using things like data and AI to automate those things. And again, quickly, there was a study by McKinsey that said up to a third of all nursing and physician activities could be automated with AI. So figure out how to do that. And then imagine the story if you could go to every one of you to say, what if I could give you 30% of your time back to be spending more time at the bedside with patients, doing research, or actually getting home to see your kids more often? I mean, to me, that's the value proposition we're talking about. And I think that was more than a minute.
No, you did great. Thanks you, Tom.
Thank you. I hope that was of some value. Again, I apologize not being able to see you, be with you, but great topic, and thank you for everything you do.
So I just really want to say, on behalf of the Board of Directors of Nurses House, a very special thank you to all of you for making this donation possible. And our one message is if you do know a nurse that's in need, or if you'd like to make a donation, please join us at www.nurseshouse.org. Thank you again so much.